I've always had one sleeping habit. Whether at home or in a hotel, I always use the deadbolt and put the door chain on. Especially in unfamiliar hotels, it gives me a sense of security. But it wasn't until that night 6 months ago that I truly understood. Whether the door is locked sometimes doesn't matter at all. It happened 6 months ago. A last-minute schedule change meant I had to spend a night at a budget hotel in a small city. The hotel wasn't large, the decor was slightly worn, and half the LEDs on the sign were broken, but the front desk staff was polite, and checking was quick. The motion sensor lights in the stairwell were slow to react. I had to cough every few steps to keep them on. A thin layer of dust coated the corners, and the air held a damp, musty smell mixed with the scent of cheap cigarettes wafting from the end of the hallway. It was stifling. I was in room 607 that night, right next to the fire exit. The room wasn't big, but it was cleaner than I'd expected. The only thing that made me uncomfortable was, it was too close to the door, barely 5 feet away. Lying in bed adjusting my pillow, I could see a sliver of faint yellow light from the hallway peeking under the door. It flickered on and off with the occasional passing footsteps. I got up, turned the deadbolt twice, and carefully checked that the door chain was securely fastened before feeling relieved. It was almost 1 a.m. After a quick wash, I turned off the light and got into bed. The room was quiet in the dark, only the rhythmic hum of the AC lulling me to sleep. I glanced at my phone. 1:13. I fell asleep soon after. The sound of knocking woke me. The time on my phone screen was 3:58. It was very soft, light as a feather falling against the door, but it had a strange rhythm, slow, dragging, not urgent at all, more like a probing. Knock, knock, knock. I thought I'd misheard. I held my breath and listened for a few seconds. I could even hear my own heartbeat. Just as I was about to turn over and go back to sleep, the knocking came again. The same rhythm, the same lightness, as if someone was gently tapping the door with their knuckles. It wasn't from the next room, or another guest in the hallway. The sound was right outside my door. My mind snapped awake, but I didn't dare answer immediately. Who knocks on a hotel room door at 4 in the morning? I thought maybe the front desk had the wrong room, or a drunk guest was knocking on the wrong door. I took a deep breath, cleared my throat, and tried to keep my voice calm. Who is it? No response came from the hallway. The knocking stopped. The air became deathly still, only the sound of rain tapping against the window remained. I frowned and asked again, "Who are you looking for?" Still no one spoke. Just as I thought whoever it was had left, the knocking started again. Still the same knock, knock. Knock rhythm, even lighter than before, as if afraid to wake me, or perhaps confirming I was still in the room. A chill crawled up my spine. I sat up, fumbled for my phone, and turned on the flashlight. Its weak beam illuminated the floor in front of the bed. I got out of bed quietly and walked to the door, stopping right before it. I pressed my ear against the door panel and listened. It was terrifyingly quiet outside. I couldn't even hear the faint buzz of the hallway lights. I hesitated for a few seconds, then slowly leaned forward to look through the peephole. I didn't see a person, nor did I see an empty hallway. It wasn't standing at the door. It was pressed against it, almost completely blocking the peephole. It was as if something was pressing its face tightly against the door, trying to look back in at me through the peephole. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the TV cabinet behind me. The remote control clattered to the floor, the sound shockingly loud in the silent room. I knew I couldn't open the door, but I also couldn't bring myself to look through the peephole again. I went back to the bed and picked up my phone, ready to call the police. But just as the screen lit up, the knocking came again. This time it was even lighter, slower, as if confirming I was still in the room. Just as I was hesitating about making the call, the doorknob made a soft click. It was the sound of someone from the outside gently gripping the handle and pressing it down. The pressure was light, the movement slow, as if afraid that using too much force would wake whoever was inside. I froze in terror, my eyes fixed on the doorknob, watching it twist slightly in the darkness before returning to its original position. Immediately after, the click sounded again, with the same pressure, the same rhythm, as if the person outside was testing whether the door was locked. Thankfully, I had put the door chain on earlier. Otherwise, I might have lost my mind right then. After that, it fell quiet outside my door again. No more knocking, no footsteps, only a suffocating silence. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound. About 10 seconds later, I heard a shuffling sound in the hallway. It was very faint, but long and drawn out. Not like a normal person walking, more like someone dragging their feet, devoid of strength. The sound began just outside my door and crept slowly down the hallway to the right. It was unbearably slow. Each feint she seemed to tread directly on my heart. I held my breath, listening as the noise gradually dissolved from distinct to muffled. until it vanished entirely. Though the whole ordeal lasted merely 20 seconds, it felt like an eternity. When morning came, I hadn't slept at all. After 7 a.m., I took my luggage to check out. The guy at the front desk saw my pale face and asked if I hadn't rested well. I thought about it, then asked him, was someone knocking on room 607's door around 4 a.m. yesterday? The clerk paused, then shook his head. That's impossible. No one goes up to the guest floors after 2 a.m. I asked him to check the surveillance footage. He hesitated, but maybe seeing my dreadful state, he took me to review the hallway camera. I will never forget that recording. At 3:58 a.m., a figure did stop outside room 607. I say figure because in the surveillance footage, it had no clear outline. Its whole body seemed like a patch of shadow, standing motionless outside the door. The most terrifying part was, the height of its head was all wrong. A normal person standing at the door, their head should be around the peephole. But in the video, the figure's head was positioned much higher than the peephole, almost reaching the top of the door frame. Even more bizarrely, when it left, it didn't walk. It seemed to glide, its feet never lifting, just dragging slightly across the carpet as it moved bit by bit towards the fire exit at the end of the hall, finally disappearing from view. The entire time, it made no sound. Even the surveillance couldn't pick up any footsteps. The front desk clerk's face turned pale after seeing the footage. He only said one thing. There was an incident on this floor before. I didn't ask any more questions. I just grabbed my luggage and left the hotel. To this day, every time I stay in a hotel, no matter how tired I am, I always check. Is the deadbolt fully engaged? Is the door chain on? Is there a gap under the door? Are there any strange sounds in the hallway? And more importantly, I will never, ever look through the peephole if I hear a knock at 4 a.m., because I'm afraid I won't see a person, but a face, pressed too close, too high, and far too still. I've always considered myself a rational person, someone who usually just laughs off those superstitious tales about ghosts and spirits. But that one hotel stay left me too terrified to even look in a mirror in a dimly lit room. It happened last autumn during a business trip. I arrived late, and the company had booked me into a rather old, budget business hotel. The exterior seemed fine, but the paint on the walls was peeling, revealing the concrete underneath. The lobby was dim, and the carpet held an indescribable musty odor. I was assigned to room 1208. The elevator lights flickered on and off as it ascended to the 12th floor. With each floor, the creaking and groaning grew louder. At the time, I just put it down to old wiring and didn't think much of it. Reaching my room, I noticed the door of 1208 looked more worn than the others, as if the lock had been replaced multiple times. Stepping out, the hallway was dim, the lights flickering. My footsteps echoed as I wheeled my suitcase. I swiped a key card and entered. Everything seemed normal enough. The bed was neatly made. The desk was dust-free, and the air conditioner hummed in the corner, blowing cool air. Only the mirror felt off. It was a huge mirror, set into the wall, taking up almost the entire surface. It was positioned directly opposite the bed. If you lay down, you'd see yourself just by looking up. The bottom of the frame was slightly loose, and there were faint water stain marks on the glass. I never liked sleeping facing a mirror. It always felt like being watched. So, I found a towel and tried to cover it. But the hotel towel was too small, only covering the top half, leaving the bottom exposed. I thought, whatever, it's just one night. That night, after a shower, I turned off the light and got into bed. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a soft asterisk knock, knock, knock asterisk sound, like knuckles gently tapping on something. I first thought it was the neighbor, but the sound wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the direction of the mirror. I was instantly wide awake, staring at the mirror. The room was dark, lit only by faint street light filtering through the curtains. The part covered by the towel was still, but the exposed lower portion of the glass seemed to reflect a shadow. I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, but the longer I looked, the more certain I was. It wasn't my reflection. The me in the mirror mirrored my posture and movements almost perfectly, but with one distinct difference. A second face had appeared next to the face of my reflection. It was the face of a stranger, pale, gaunt, with no whites to its eyes, just black voids. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, pressed against the shoulder of my reflection, as if someone was peering over my shoulder from behind. My mind went blank with terror. I was frozen, afraid to move. I forced myself to blink. When I looked again, the second face was gone, leaving only my own reflection. I told myself it must be a trick of the light and shadow. Maybe the mirror was dirty, maybe it was a reflection. But no explanation could convince me that what I'd seen was normal. I lay back down, trying hard to close my eyes. About 20 minutes later, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard an extremely faint whisper, as if spoken right next to my pillow. I see you. Every hair on my body stood on end. It was absolutely not my imagination, not a sound from the hallway, not the wind. That voice was right by my ear. I bolted upright. The room was empty, but the shadow in the mirror had returned. This time, the me in the mirror wasn't moving in sync. The real me was sitting up, but the reflection of me was still lying down, and that pale face was again pressed close to the reflection's ear, lips slightly parted as if speaking. I don't know where I found the courage, but I rushed to the door and tried to yank it open. It felt like someone was holding it shut from the outside. It wouldn't budge. I pulled with all my might, too afraid to look back. Just then, a soft laugh came from behind me. It wasn't malicious mockery, but something intimate, subtle, like a breath forced through a constricted throat. A cold numbness spread across my scalp. My blood felt like it had frozen solid. My hands and feet turned icy. Almost sobbing, I mustered every ounce of strength and gave the door handle one final, desperate pull. Suddenly, with a loud click, the door flew open. Thrown off balance, I stumbled forward and fell heavily onto the hallway carpet. A sharp, burning pain shot through my knees and palms. I looked back in terror, and my heart nearly stopped. A face, deathly pale, was pressed close behind me, almost touching mine. This face was utterly bloodless, the skin stretched taut like thin parchment, seeming ready to tear at the slightest touch. Where the eyes should have been were too deep, black hollows, no whites, just endless darkness, like gateways to hell. The lips were colorless, cracked like a parched riverbed, curled into a faint, grotesque, and horrifying smile. Its body was hidden in the darkness behind it, only a vague outline visible. Just as that face was about to press against mine, I suddenly felt a lightness, as if breaking free from a dark abyss. My eyes snapped open. I was lying in bed, gasping for air, my entire body drenched in sweat. I looked around frantically. The room was silent. A wave of relief washed over me. It must have been a nightmare. But as my breathing calmed slightly, my eyes fell on the bedside table, and I froze completely. The bedside lamp was knocked over on the floor, its shade shattered. But I remembered clearly, the lamp had been perfectly fine when I went to sleep. Fear engulfed me once more. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the door. Down in the lobby, the staff member was at the front desk. After some discussion, the staff, albeit reluctantly, agreed to give me a different room. In the new room, I inspected every corner, ensuring nothing was amiss. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and lay on the bed, but sleep was impossible. My eyes remained fixed on the door, my ears straining to catch the slightest sound in the room. I tried to force myself to relax. I don't know how much time passed before exhaustion finally pulled me into a half-awake, half-dreaming state. In this mottled consciousness, I noticed the me in the mirror move. It slowly sat up, a sinister smile spreading across its face, and began to lean closer towards me. I was horrified, wanting to run, but found my body paralyzed. I could only watch helplessly as it drew nearer and nearer. I've always thought that with hotels, the scariest thing isn't ghosts. It's that you never really know what kind of person is staying on the other side of the wall. An experience last October made me even more certain of this. I had to make an unexpected work trip to a remote town. It was late when I arrived, and without a reservation, I ended up at a small hotel in the town center. A 3-story building with yellow exterior walls. It looked a bit old but reasonably clean. I stayed in room 302. Next door was 301. The room was pretty standard. Old wooden floors, walls with a few old nail holes. But overall, it was fine, so I settled in. The room was at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway. The old wooden floorboards creaked softly underfoot. The room wasn't large, but it was tidy, aside from a persistent damp smell. There were a few nail holes in the walls, as if pictures or a mirror had once hung there. The wallpaper on the wall by the head of the bed, the one shared with room 301, was slightly yellowed, but otherwise, nothing seemed unusual. After washing up in the evening, I read a book in bed. The soundproofing was indeed poor. I could faintly hear TVS from other rooms and footsteps in the hallway, but these sounds gradually died down. By around 11, the entire building seemed to have fallen asleep. Just as I turned off the light to sleep, a clear knocking sound came from next door. Not loud banging, but light, deliberate, with a clear rhythm. Knock, 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 double quotes. I paused, thinking the neighbor might be hanging something or arranging their luggage. But the knocking continued intermittently for nearly 20 minutes, sometimes with seconds between, other times 3 or 4 knocks in a row. I could even pinpoint the location of the knocks. Right on the wall by the head of my bed. Was the person next door completely oblivious to the time? I knocked on the wall twice, hoping they'd realize they were disturbing someone. The knocking stopped immediately. I thought I'd solved it. But after I turned off the light again, it started once more. Knock, knock, knock. As if they'd waited for me to try sleeping before continuing. I slept very poorly that night. The second night, around 11, just as I switched off the bedside lamp, the knocking began right on time, the exact same rhythm and intensity as the previous night. As if the person was repeating the same actions identically. Feeling irritated, I reached out and knocked back. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the response was almost immediate, 3 knocks back. It felt strange. It wasn't noisy, but more like, as if they had been waiting for my response. This wasn't unconscious behavior. It was some form of communication. A chill suddenly ran down my spine. If it were just an ordinary guest, why would they be so focused on the neighbor's every move? Why respond to my knocks so instantly? I slept with earplugs that night, but the knocking still traveled through the structural vibrations of the quiet night, leaving me in a half-awake state until around 2 a.m. On the third morning, I couldn't take it anymore. While eating breakfast downstairs, I asked the girl at the front desk, "Does the person in 301 have some kind of habit? He keeps knocking on the wall at night." The girl looked startled. "You mean next door? 301. No one is staying there." I frowned. That can't be right. I heard it clearly for 2 nights straight. She showed me the register. The key for 301 was indeed hanging on the wall, never taken. The owner, standing nearby, chimed in. "Sir, 301 hasn't been booked all week. The keys are right here. No one could get in." Sure enough, the entry for room 301 in the register was blank. I just said, maybe I misheard. Could have been sound from another room. But inside, I felt deeply unsettled. Maybe it was pipes resonating within the wall structure. Maybe someone was in the room next door but forgot to register. I forced myself to believe it was a misunderstanding. Until that night. The third night, around 11:30 p.m. The knocking started again, but this time, it began at one point on the wall, and then slowly moved downward, as if someone was squatting down while leaning against the wall. The force was so light it seemed like knuckles, not a fist. I froze completely. I tried knocking back twice, but this time, there was no response. The knocking grew softer and softer, so quiet it began to sound like the faint vibration of breathing through the wall. In that moment, it suddenly hit me. If the sound was coming from asterisk inside asterisk the room, it couldn't feel this close, this real. The sound was too near, so near I could feel the subtle vibration of the wall surface through the plaster. It was as if someone was sitting on the other side, their back against the wall, slowly leaning their head against it. I was too terrified to sleep. I left the light on all night. The next morning, I told the front desk, "I want to see the room next door. Is there something wrong with it?" The owner hesitated, but eventually took me up. He unlocked the door to 301. Room 301 was indeed empty. The layout mirrored my room 302, but it was more sparse, almost stark. The furniture was neatly arranged, the bed made, and the air carried the dusty smell of a room long unoccupied. I walked straight to the wall shared with 302. The wall was clean, but at about the same height as my headboard, there was a patch, roughly the size of a human face, that was noticeably lighter in color. It looked like an area that had been shielded from sunlight for a long time by something about the size, where a person's head might rest against it. I asked the owner, "What is this?" He shook his head. "We rarely clean this room. No need if no one's staying, but this patch. I've never noticed it before." Looking at that pale patch, a wave of numbness washed over me. It corresponded exactly to where my head had been for the past 2 nights. "I need to change rooms," I said. The owner, seeming to sense my unease, quickly moved me to room 305, at the other end of the hallway, far from 301. On my final night, I didn't hear any knocking, but I still slept restlessly, haunted by the feeling of something watching me from the darkness. Checking out the next morning was a relief. The moment I stepped out the hotel's main door, I finally felt a sense of release. But as I walked towards the roadside, for some reason, I couldn't help but glance back at the 3rd floor. The windows for 302 and 301 were side by side. The curtains in 302 were drawn, but the curtains in 301, despite there being no wind, twitched slightly, not a natural sway, but more like someone had used a finger to part them slightly, making the fabric shiver. I stared at that window for a good 10 seconds. In the darkness behind the glass, there seemed to be a shape, slightly taller than a person, standing perfectly still, I immediately turned around and quickened my pace, leaving without a second look. The curtains in 302 were drawn, but the curtains in 301, despite there being no wind, twitched slightly, not a natural sway, but more like someone had used a finger to part them slightly, making the fabric shiver. I stared at that window for a good 10 seconds. In the darkness behind the glass, there seemed to be a shape, slightly taller than a person, standing perfectly still. I immediately turned around and quickened my pace, leaving without a second look. Thinking back, I still can't say for sure if it was something supernatural. Maybe someone had found a way into that empty room. Maybe the hotel was hiding something. Maybe there's a logical explanation for it all. But what I am sure of is this: during those 3 nights, whatever was on the other side of that wall knew I was listening, and knew I was responding. And as I left, I could feel it there, behind that window, watching me go. That feeling of being watched still surfaces in my memory, especially during quiet, late nights. Whenever I stay in a hotel now, I instinctively check if the room next door is occupied. And I'll lightly tap twice on the wall by the head of the bed, then hold my breath and wait. Fortunately, there has never been a response.